Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Statecraft. This is Sammy here. I'm the CEO of Certicraft. Certicraft's on a mission to help craft cannabis producers transition into and thrive in the regulated market, and we do that primarily through the easiest and simplest seat-to-sale compliance software that makes the headache of Health Canada and the CRA go away for licensed producers. If you are such a producer and curious, reach out to us. We'd love to help you out and chat, and that'll be the end of all the corporate ads for this whole thing. Certicraft sponsors this thing, which is why I say that here. The Statecraft is a podcast series where we try to have real conversations on the state of legal craft cannabis in Canada. Today's conversation I'm excited about because it's a definition of legal that is contentious. There's, in fact, a legal battle happening right now that we'll be getting into today with our guests here today, with both the BC and federal governments on what is legal in this context. Really, really excited to have this conversation and bring this perspective that we haven't had before into the Statecraft. But before I get into that, I'm going to do a few housekeeping things and the land acknowledgement. I see some of y'all are already chatting in the chat there. Thank you. Please say hi. It's so much more fun when people are interacting and responding and doing what they will. You'll get a lot more engagement if you do that. If you have any questions for our guests, there is a separate questions tab where you can go ask your questions there and upvote the questions that you like that you want answered. And at the end, we will go through those questions there and ask Cory and Rob whatever the question might be. I think that's kind of it on the logistical stuff of this system we're using here. The last thing I'll do before introducing Cory and Rob is a land acknowledgement. So I live and work in the Kootenays in Nelson, BC. This region here is the unceded territories of the TIMIXw people, and through intermarriage, the Tanaha. And when I first moved here, I was pretty confused because I lived in a part of Vancouver that had a lot of Indigenous people before here, and coming here, I just didn't see any more Indigenous folks. And for about a year, I kept asking friends here, hey, why don't I see Indigenous people? Why don't I see Indigenous people? And eventually, I met a woman that worked with the local matriarch of the TIMIXw people here today, and she finally had an answer for me, which is they're mostly slaughtered. There used to be thousands of TIMIXw people here, and through scalping programs and through a whole bunch of terrible things done by colonists here, that population of thousands dwindled down to less than 10. That's the story that has happened not only here, but in a lot of places throughout Canada. And I think any part of meaningful reconciliation starts with first learning about what happened to the first people before colonists and settlers came here, and to be honest about it and actually learn about it. And I'm often disappointed with the land acknowledgements that are done in Canada, especially from government, because it's really just I said the sentence, checkmark, pat on my back. It's there's no real substance to it whatsoever. So whoever you are, wherever you're coming from, I very much encourage you to learn about what happened, honestly, what happened where you are at, as a first step. As a first step is to just understand the truth and be able to express it. There's a lot more I can get into here, I forget which, either the BC government or the Canadian government declaring the TIMIXw extinct when they weren't, just to avoid having to follow the treaties that they've signed around getting permissions to build dams and ruined all the habitats that the TIMIXw relied on here. And there's quite a bit more that happened: destruction of agricultural land and not land, I guess, waters. But I don't want the conversation to be entirely that. So I think it's usually it's a bit of an abrupt segue from this into what comes next. But today it actually is somewhat appropriate because there's Indigenous struggles have been real. There's been significant genocide in this country that's taken place over the course of a few hundred years, and there's a lot of oppressive systems and structures that exist towards Indigenous people here, and Indigenous folks have had to fight very hard to gain their rights back. And but that's an ongoing battle. Indigenous people are still not truly given the ability to self-govern, and there's been some shifts in the global legal space through a thing called UNDRIP that we'll get into this conversation, that has given a framework for Indigenous people to self-govern, and BC has signed onto that, which is very interesting because it means that the BC government is saying, hey, we are letting Indigenous folks self-govern, but then not actually at the same time, which is a very interesting kind of space to be in, which is kind of, I think, where the core of what Cory and Rob are doing revolves around. So that's all I will say as a preamble, because I really want most of this conversation to come from them, not from me as somebody who's just I'll give you some context on me. I grew up in Palestine. Active genocide going on there right now. I escaped there, came here to have a better life where I would not be subjected to genocidal policies, and was very sad in my first year here to discover that Indigenous folks in Canada were treated no differently by the Canadian government. In fact, it was worse because there was no internet, so there was no way for people to like see what's going on and from around the world kind of do what they can to help stop that from happening. So the genocide here was a lot more effective in a sense. There's been so many cultures and nations that have been wiped out to various degrees, and so many languages lost, and so I feel a lot of connection to kind of what's going on here and what's been happening here to Indigenous folks, and that's kind of just some context on me and where like all of what I'm sharing is coming from. And with that introduction of myself, I will bring Rob and Cory in here. Hi guys.
Hello.
I would love for each of you to say a thing or two about who you are. Cory, do you want to maybe go first with the matching sweater that you're wearing there?
Yeah. Looking good, bud. Looking good. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. My name's Cory Brewer. I'm from the Okanagan Indian Band, Silks Nation territory. President of TIMIXw Wellness here, and president of the Silk Cannabis Society as well. Thank you for having us on the show, Sammy. This is awesome, and hopefully we can share some knowledge and learn a thing or two as well. Thank you.
You're most welcome. Thanks for being here, Cory. And I'm going to ask you a bit more about what each of those two companies are after. Maybe let's do it before Rob introduces himself. Could you say, like in one sentence, what each of TIMIXw and the Silks Cannabis Society are, and then we'll turn it over to Rob.
So TIMIXw Wellness is our company that we've developed for the wellness side of the industry, and cannabis industry, mushroom, psilocybin, and all of that stuff. And we have 2 shops out of Vernon, and we did have 3, but we did close one down. Then another family member opened up a gas station, grocery store type of thing, because we did have fires rip through our community and take a couple businesses that we really relied on there. So we made a few changes in that area, and it's working out quite well. So the society is a group of individuals that are First Nation that are kind of banding together to work and lobby for cannabis and the rights and our rights within the industry. And we look to work with as many First Nations across BC and Canada and beyond, because what we can really do is create nation-to-nation agreements that not to leave anybody out, but don't include Canada, right? So, yeah, we are taking some big steps in the right direction. Thank you.
Thanks, Cory. And Rob, who are you?
Good morning. Thank you, Sammy. My name is Robert Laurie. Just like to acknowledge and respect that I'm on the lands of the Nanaimo, Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, whose traditional territory and historical relationships with their land continue to this day. As indicated, my name is Robert Laurie. I am the principal and founder of Ad Lucem Law Corporation, It's, again, a real honor to be here today. And Sammy, I'm going to have to get you a proper Star Wars hat. I'm going to get you a Empire Strikes Back. I mean, of all the Force Awakens, at least you didn't wear the Phantom Menace. But anyway.
This is a free hat, man. This is a free hat. It's just the colors match, which is why I wore it. That's it.
It would be an honor for me. I got to get you a Star Wars Empire Strikes Back. Because if you're going to roll, you might as well roll dirty with the original 3. And of the original 3, Empire Strikes Back is just still baller. Can't wait till my kids are properly old enough. I mean, like, forget Mandalorian. Let's go back to the beginning. Boba Fett, Slave 1. But anyway, so yes, I am been getting over COVID, so I don't feel 100%, but I'm going to give 100% today on this call. And I'm excited that we've been talking about this call for a while, actually. I think it went back to the Unicorn Cup or before that. And Cory,
I think that's the first time. No, it was before that. It was in Edmonton at the Grow Up Conference.
You're right, but we kind of, again, revisited those initial plans at Unicorn, and then, it's been a number of months, so here we are. But no, it's been very exciting. For the last 10 years, I've been running Adlusum Law Corporation, and one of my earliest cases when I used to do legal aid, and I got through the Legal Services Society, a hunting and fishing case in Haida Gwaii. And for me, that involved, getting into a situation involving a hereditary chief and his nephew who was up, and they were shooting seals and sea lions. And it was just a fabulous case. And it exposed to me that, wow, Canada, we have two systems, whether we acknowledge it or not, with regards to how Indigenous situations can be disposed of in the criminal justice system. And of course, moving forward, I've been fairly well known in the cannabis space and was one of the lawyers on the Vancouver dispensary test case, which was indexed in the Supreme Court as City of Vancouver versus Karuna Health and others. So following that case, just before we kind of turn it back over to you and Cory, it was kind of when I met Cory, was at a time after, legalization. But actually, these issues involving issues of the law and Indigenous participation, which, again, building on my interest of Indigenous legal work going back a history of 10 years, has kind of culminated in where we are today in a perfect storm, which, again, I'm super excited to share what we're up to, but none of this would be possible without Cory Brewer and the efforts and the steps and the foundations that he and others have laid with regards to paving a way for Indigenous participation in the cannabis industry. So I'm honored to be here today, Sammy. It's an honor to finally be a guest on Certicraft and to appear with Cory today to share what's shaping up to probably be the largest case so far in my experience, and it's only getting larger with some of the developments that we'll share. I'm honored to be here. So thank you both, and back over to you two.
Amazing. Thanks, Rob. Before we shift gears into the main discussion here, I just have a question for you, Rob, a curiosity here. What does ad lucem mean?
Ad lucem is Latin, which means toward or to light. And let me just share a little story. So I'm a 3rd degree Freemason. I'm a master Mason. And for me, I really felt like the rules and the teachings and the Masonic wisdom played a huge part of my life. And ultimately, hence the name. A Mason is always moving towards light, enlightenment, or resolution. And very much, you meet a client in a state of darkness, and through the provision of law, logic, reasoning, we move towards resolution. So to me, it's a nice sort of a symbolism to what I do as a lawyer. And I remind clients, it's always the darkest just before the dawn. So it's a good name, Ad Lucem Law Corporation.
Thank you. I thought lucem might have been like lucidity or something like that, but light.
Think of Lucifer, the bringer of light. There you go.
All right, so let's get into the main event here. So, there's this court case going on, but I want to take it back further because this court case ultimately is about the Swiss nation being able to self-govern and have their own laws around cannabis, and it goes beyond cannabis. It's about self-governance. Really, is what this is about. So, what I want to go back to, I want to ask you, Cory, is how did this even start? From can you walk me through kind of how, or walk us through rather, with everybody else here, how you and your nation began the process of even creating a framework around cannabis? How did that come to be? How did it emerge? And what was the early journey like?
Yeah, you bet. So the early journey was pretty interesting because so I've started out in forestry, hand faller and stuff like that, but I've always partaken in cannabis and know the cannabis industry. And when I seen that the UNDRIP, the United Nations Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous People, was being tabled or lobbied for and tabled as law in BC, it really I really took interest in that because I could see the potentials of us being able to create our frameworks or a solid foundation for our framework. Sorry, go ahead, Sammy.
How long ago did UNDRIP become law in BC?
I believe it's been just about 3 years now. I think maybe 2 to 3 years.
And it was being considered for a while before then.
Yeah, it was there for a while, but they tabled it about
Cory?
2.5 to 3 years.
Yeah. Let me just clarify. So it was a United Nations convention, the United Nations, which at the UN, and in order to implement international convention, it had to be passed as federal law first. So that's where you have UNDRIP, which is the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Persons Act. However, as we know, Canada's made up of 10 provinces and 3 territories? Yeah, 3 territories, which in order to implement that law into the provincially, BC is the only province which has taken UNDRIP, called it DRIPA, the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Persons Act, and that passed into BC, I believe, in 2021, I think. 2019, 2020. I'll have to check, but date's not important. What's important is it's both federally and provincially implemented, and that's huge because that's basically taking international convention and implementing it fully into domestic law.
So the Canadian government also ratified this. It wasn't just the BC government.
Federally, they implemented the UNDRIP Act. Okay. BC, right, under its powers of Section 92, implemented the DRIPA, which is the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. So again, why that's significant is you've got international, federal, provincial, as well as Indigenous First Nations laws, more or less all aligned at this intersection. Sorry, Cory.
And Jess is confirming in the chat that it was 2019. Yeah, thanks for your patience there, Cory. I just wanted to kind of establish that for my own brain because I would just have been like, when if we hadn't done that. Okay, so go ahead. So UNDRIP happened, ratified by BC. You're seeing an opportunity there. You're interested. Yeah. What happens next?
Yeah, so seeing an opportunity and for us, not only my band or our band, but every band across the board here to start off developing their laws and their bylaws and frameworks around our natural resources, cannabis being one of them, the right way. So when we look at it, yeah, absolutely, we're a third, almost like a different government than the provincial, federal, and to be able to go forward as a collective is one of the main goals. And so we do reach out to other bands that are looking to do the same thing. So yeah, the journey's been awesome. It's been we meet a lot of different people, learning so much along the way. Again, I want to thank Shay for inviting us to the Unicorn Cup because we had a great time and we made a lot of connections over that way as well. So yeah, it's been quite the ride, and it's only getting better. First Nations are looking to assert themselves within their territories and jurisdictions the right way and being recognized the right way. So yeah. And if my friend Robert wants to add anything, then by all means.
Well, I got one more question for you, Cory, before we ask Robert to add things.
Yeah.
So, you saw an opportunity there. You started, talking to your band, reaching out to other bands around you. How did it shift from just conversations into, okay, let's actually start creating a framework and policies?
It shifted when we as a membership took it upon ourselves to work with our leadership to develop our own cannabis law. And we also worked with the BCAFN to help kind of steer the cannabis First Nations cannabis toolkit.
And that's for anybody who doesn't know that acronym. It's the Assembly of First Nations in BC here.
Correct. And from there we've just been working, contacting one another, keeping in touch with some other individuals about the same thing, and looking to build the framework all across BC. Because as far as I know, it's not only going to stop in BC. We're going to kind of come across the whole board on this one.
And excuse my ignorance here, but I'm not too well versed in the governance of Indigenous nations, and I imagine it's also different from nation to nation. But with the Silks Nation, like when you're talking about creating these laws, is it the nation as a whole? Is it just your band? Like how does that work?
So it started out as our band, but we're looking to have it implemented as the nation as a whole. And that means
so are there like kind of two levels of governance then? There's the band governance and the nation governance.
So kind of, yeah, right. So it all goes to the nation to benefit the people, right? And it does start out at the band level, or I would actually say the membership level is where it starts out. Then it kind of goes to the band, then up to the nation, and up to the BCAF band.
What does that mean when you say membership?
Membership is community members that are band members that there's a lot that live on reserve, but there's a lot that live off reserve as well. Our band, we have over 2,000 members. Some bands are smaller. And like you said, there's a lot of different bands are a lot different in different ways. It's pretty interesting actually with it, because we're still learning as we go forward as well.
Yeah. Cool. Rob, were you involved at all in this process that Cory is talking about, or is this like pre-Rob Cory connection?
Well, I got to know Cory through, again, a number of other Indigenous. I'm quite lucky with, again, just having spent a number of years doing Indigenous work and being known for work in cannabis. A lot of people started kind of being introduced to me through other First Nations connections. And so let's kind of go back to the beginning. I mean, we can look at cannabis. I mean, there's so many beginnings. If you really want to go back to the beginning, it could be 13 to 33,000 years ago, depending on when you want to start this. But the conversation, I think, really for the purposes of Certicraft, if we look at legalization, that was such a big deal. You know, that was 15 years of what John Conroy calls the litany of litigation, from R.V. Parker in 2001 to the election of Justin Trudeau in 2015, and a series of big litigation cases culminating in Allard and Owen Smith in about 2014 and 15 and 2016, and which effectively planted the seed for where a federal government was set to introduce a national legal federal licensing of a restricted narcotic. That was pretty huge. I mean, the impact of that is significant. However, Indigenous were pretty much shut out of the process. Not just shut out, they weren't even consulted. It was just like they got a memo like everybody else with, hey, this is coming, deal with it. Whereas Indigenous, because of being what I would call a fourth level of government, I mean, my background before law school was I studied political science and international relations. And, Indigenous are a fourth level of government. And that fourth level, sometimes it's on par with the federal. Sometimes it has to do with the provincial. But again, it's a unique set of circumstances and rules. And ultimately, we think that the federal government, set the seed for, or a vulnerability by really excluding Indigenous. And the exclusion of Indigenous over cannabis is just one way to look at this case. If we look at how cannabis is actually regulated, it isn't on like a plant-based basis. It's at the phytocannabinoid level. So if we flip to Schedule 1 of the Cannabis Act, word for word is more or less cannabis and phytocannabinoids from cannabis and non-cannabis derived sources, and then down to subsection 3, regardless of process, which basically means, right, if you're doing anything with phytocannabinoids and if you're processing them, that requires a license under the cannabis regulations. It's a processing license, right? Even if you take legal 0.3% THC hemp and do something with that, turn it into a tincture, that technically is a process. And so the fact of the matter is when it comes to Indigenous people, connection with their land, customs, culture, and history, as well as rights with regards to sovereignty, economic self-sufficiency. But where I think it gets interesting is within the realm of food, social, and ceremonial purposes, there was absolutely no consideration of this, and there still has been no real provision of this to a satisfactory degree. Now, without jumping ahead too far, another sort of piece where Cory and I and some of the others within our network got involved was dealing with the provincial government in these sessions that were hosted by a management consultancy group called Mohican Management. And it was effectively a roundtable, right? Looking at how should Indigenous be included and involved in the legal market. And effectively, it was kind of like a series of pep rallies for why going Section 119, which under the Cannabis Control Licensing Act, it's Section 119 or 119, effectively an Indigenous band, not an Indigenous individual or a group of individuals, but a band acting through chief and council can contract into a agreement with the Minister of Finance at the provincial government and effectively go legal by transitioning into a Section 119. Now, there's been about 8 or 9 that have gone 119 at the time of those, from about the time of those sessions. And the funny thing is, for those who all attended the BC Craft Summit, again, it was very much of, hey, here is our poster children of the Section 119 program. And on one hand, you have, folks who've done really well, and it's been good for highlighting Indigenous innovation in industry. But when you actually look at some of these groups, and I mean, I've had, chiefs of some of these companies say, look, by my own admission, we had dollar signs in our eyes and it was all about the money. But, and the big but is we gave up too much. We signed away too much rights, which boils back to the point that I'm trying to make, is although the focal point is cannabis, the larger issues here have to do with Aboriginal or existing Aboriginal rights is how it's regarded under the law. So if we take circumstances like hunting and fishing, farming and or gathering, foraging, gambling, tobacco, right? These are all cases that have tested the federal government where there has been an establishment of an existing right. So I look at it very simply, and this is why this is such an exciting case. There's anthropology, legal, Indigenous, and history, because ultimately we're trying to establish that Cannabisia, hemp, the species, was here prior to contact with Europeans. I mean, ultimately the official narrative is hemp came here by the Europeans. Well, that may be the case, but other plants such as coneflower or echinacea is also similar if not identical, to phytocannabinoids in cannabis. So ultimately, if you take an indigenous band who've been making tincture and harvesting echinacea and dealing in with as such, they technically would be in breach of the cannabis regulations, which then leads to, why is there no Aboriginal access on grounds of food, social, or ceremonial use, just like you see with hunting and gambling and others? So without saying too much more, I think this is why the government here is, again, taking some notice, because although we're blessed that the focal point be a cannabis issue, this cannabis issue kind of gets involved in other Aboriginal issues, including nation-to-nation trade, right? Which, again, when you bring in UNDRIP, and I'll sum up here, Sammy, when you bring in UNDRIP, there's differences between what UNDRIP provides in terms of rights versus what is in place under the Indian Act and the constitutional relationship between Indigenous bands and the federal government, which is under the rubric of Section 91 of the Constitution. All of this gets brought into focus, and I hope everyone's still with me here.
Oh yeah.
Still with you, though. We've gone down a few tangents, and I want to bring us back to where we were at with Cory, with kind of the development of this framework within his band. What's the name of your band, Cory? Does it have? Do bands have names? This is how little I know.
The Okanagan Indian Band. OKIB is what we call for short. But yes, the Okanagan Indian Band is our band.
Okay, so I'm imagining that, you know, you're talking about like reaching out to them, reaching out to others. I imagine that there was a framework that did get developed.
Correct.
What was the timeline for that? When did that?
So it kind of started out small in that, because it's a living document that we're creating as we go forward, and like I said, we're all still learning as well and implementing new, different, and exciting things as we go. So it's very much been a learning process, and kind of all of us working together more than we initially have been. And that includes other bands working with and amongst other bands too. So things are unraveling really well, I think, or I'd like to think, and we're just kind of picking up the pace. And
so let's talk about today, right now. What does the framework cover that you guys have? Like, what's the extent?
So what we have is we've done our cannabis bylaws, what we created, and we've created our own licenses out of that, which our band would license us. So we would get our license through our band, and what we're looking to do through our society is work with different bands to help them, I guess, shine the light on the potential for them to do the same thing, and work with us so that we're doing it as a collective. So we're kind of on the same platform, if you will, and going together, as a collective. Yeah.
Cool.
So right now, we have created our own license. We look to work through the society to create a licensing system that we can, say, hand to different reserves as they go forward as well.
And then they can just kind of take it and tweak it as they desire, basically, if they wanted something to be a little different.
Correct. And a lot of bands are unaware of this. Well, I don't know if they're unaware, but they're unaware of the way forward, I guess I'll say.
How to practically make it happen.
See, the part of the unique challenge is you've got band and council and rules on reserve and band land, which is kind of a hybrid. I mean, you know, the band and band council do take on some responsibilities like policing and land management and other roles that traditionally, you know, in off reserve are handled by municipality and through delegated authority. But you have less of that in Indigenous, where you take an issue like cannabis and just sort of plop it straight into the middle of that unique structure and decision-making apparatus, you get these unique scenarios. So really, this is why we're at a unique time. And that was what revealed during the Mohican management sessions, is that really the BC government doesn't know what to do with Indigenous other than to try to incentivize the majority by saying, hey, look, we got money and incentives, and come on over here. The weather's warmer and the grass is greener, no pun intended. Which the irony is the 8 or 9 bands that have gone that route, some of them have very different stories to tell. And I think, if anything, you should do some further research and invite some of these other Section 119s, because I think you'll get a very checkered picture of versus how the government portrays this as the promised land. And so why this is all unique is that you see how the CSU is engaging in enforcement. Now, for those who don't know, the CSU is the Community Safety Unit, which is, again, like a quasi enforcement branch.
Hey, Rob, I'm gonna cut you off there because you're jumping ahead again. I want to we'll get there.
Okay.
Unless Cory is disappearing. I was gonna ask Cory another question.
Well, anyway,
it was gonna lead us to what you're talking about here. Okay, go ahead with what you were saying, Rob. If Cory's taking a little break, then we'll continue with the CSU story.
Sure.
Oh, sorry, guys. I'm here. I just had to do something. Sorry.
No, here, Cory, over to you.
Okay,
Sammy wants to take the discussion back to, I guess, the band politics level.
Well, I just want the narrative to slowly evolve and not jump around, because we've kind of been jumping around, and I want to everything you're sharing is stuff we're gonna get into. I just want it to kind of be cohesive as we move forward here. So you talked, Cory, about creating this framework. You talked about the ways in which you're trying to support other bands throughout BC, beyond BC, to be able to kind of adopt similar approaches to you guys. Now I want to talk about you specifically, and let's say TIMIXw Wellness, which you're wearing your brand's sweater there. Presumably, and this is my assumption here, you can correct me if I'm wrong, you were licensed from your band through this framework that you guys have been creating and evolving. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes, we obtained the first 2 licenses that the OKIB had developed.
Cool. Can you walk us through what that experience was like, and how that, because I know there have been some brush-ups with the CSU that Rob was talking about here. Can you walk us through kind of what that was like once you got your license and started operating, in relation both to maybe you and your band specifically, and then into more of the colonial governments that exist in Canada, that and how they have responded and reacted to you being licensed by your band and operating that way?
Yeah, you bet. So with our band, how we started out, everybody, we kind of had to explain amongst each other the potentials of the industry and how we could carry it forward. First, starting out within our band and within our license and regulations, and push forward and work with other bands as well. So we started that out. We created our licensing, and a couple of us, there's because we're all familiar, well, not all, but a lot of people are familiar with the Green Mile, right? So we have a lot of band members that are participating in the industry that are not participating in the industry. With that, that's where we started kind of trying to figure out how we can navigate certain things within our band, there's band members are being used to kind of be shield other people from the provincial law, and that's one thing that we're having issues with navigating still to this day. But it's I like to think we're getting somewhere with it, and so
let's get to that conversation in a little bit. For now, I just want to ask specifically about your project, TIMIXw Wellness? Like, what's that been like in terms of?
It's been great. It's been great. How we've started out. We started out on the right foot with the right intentions, and that was to help out, and not only to help people become aware of our frameworks, not but to help help deliver the medicinal side of the plant, and not just cannabis, but other medicinal plants and herbs as well. So it's been going really well for us. We have many customers that really they have a lot of great stories to tell about the path of wellness that they're on when they choose our way, I guess, instead of pills and other kind of pharmaceutical directions that they can go. So we do have a lot of great stories that our customers have been telling us of wellness through working with us, and another thing too is the mental health and wellness side of things that we look to work with psilocybin and other types of like MDMA type of things. And yeah, a lot of good things have been coming out from what we've been doing and how we've been going about it. And then when we started we started seeing more and more interest outside of our works that we've been doing, is when we went and created the Silks Cannabis Society, so we can look to work with others. Yes.
Let's go back
But
to
yes.
TIMIXw though. If I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken, despite everything you're saying here, you guys have been rated though. You guys have had like a lot of challenges
So
with
TIMIXw Wellness hasn't been rated. We've had
it's a
visits
different
from the
project.
CSU. Yeah. So that's when UNDRIP came up and DRIPA came to light. There is when we decided to create Tupa's joint and open a shop off reserve within our territory and within city limits of Vernon. So and that's kind of the next step to TIMIXw and what the direction we went. So TIMIXw is we've been creating a solid foundation and making a lot of different working partners, I guess, to ensure that we're on the right path and always stay on that path. And yeah, it's done really well. And from that, we've created Tupas, and then that is when we stepped off reserve and got a letter of support from Chief Byron Lewis and the council to do just that. And
was that
Again,
also licensed through this band licensing system that you were talking about?
no, that's the thing that we're trying to navigate is because we couldn't license a band entity or a band member entity off reserve. But
Okay, so that's a
there's
limitation that exists there.
yes. Well, that's kind of where the fuzzy line is, right? Like who it's still within our jurisdiction and within our territory, and there are court cases that have not been that are still ongoing that state this. So there's we've seen the opportunity to work together, and instead of battling this out type of thing, we're looking more to work together to align it in the right way so that we are not left out, included in future frameworks as well, and yeah, just going forward together.
Rob, do you have anything to add around that piece specifically, the off reserve?
I spoke about it a little bit earlier, right? With again the jurisdictional differences between on reserve, off reserve. But let's look back at the issue of, well, why do Indigenous feel they can do this other than there's, again, clearly being part of economic upward and forward mobility. I mean, let's face it, Indigenous, like everybody saw the potential in cannabis business. But again, Indigenous connection with land and medicine and creator's bounty, which includes, plant medicines and species of fungi of that kingdom. And so it's really interesting when you look at the movement throughout history of people, fungi, and plants. Again, there's this correlation between the three. And ultimately, what is unique about our case is a lot of what we feel about Indigenous history has been whitewashed or Smithsonian by the Smithsonian, for example, which discount evidence of civilization and evidence of cannabis, for example, cannabicia being part of the pharmacopoeia. So at the end of the day, with the way that Canada has regulated cannabis to the exclusion of Indigenous groups while involving effectively a phytocannabinoid that can be regulated as such, as well as the differences in the law between provincial and municipal regulation, which again, this, Cory should have been, if anything, dealing with the municipality of Vernon and saying, hey, could you license us? But really, there hadn't been a real issue. They were kind of leaving that issue alone. And how we got to where we are now, which I think is important, is Cory did make the decision to operate. He opened. At some point in time, the CSU attended. They gave him what's called a education visit. And they said, if you keep doing what you're doing, we'll come back. On all occasions, Cory and members of staff indicated that, well, what we're doing, we do not believe is illegal. We're permitted to do this under UNDRIP, banned law, nation-to-nation trade. I mean, all the reasons given, at which point, and at all points, these explanations were discounted by the CSU, resulting in a notice of administrative penalty being fined against the store. Actually, no, excuse me. They confiscated $64,000 in product. No NAMP has been issued, which is administrative penalty. So yes, we did ask for the cannabis back and indicate that the return of the cannabis should be permissible. It's, again, confiscation should be a mode of last resort, which again is provided for in UNDRIP if we take the position that the cannabis and the medicine in Mr. Brewer's possession was an Indigenous asset, right? Which again, it clearly was the tools and the means by which this group, who was seeking to transition and was interested to look at transitioning to Section 119. But of course, Cory did all of this before the government even came up with a Section 119 route, which is interesting because, you could say to them, why don't you just go that way? And as we've indicated, that might get to the issue of, okay, now bands can participate in a market, but it doesn't address the larger issue of a recognition and reciprocation of, well, if we are a fourth level of government, shouldn't we be administering our own taxes, our own income generation, and recouping taxes on that? So this is, again, it's put the government into a position where they're trying to fit this into a neat box, and they can't. And in order to clarify and bring some definition to this, we had to respond to the the decision of the CSU, which again was they decided we're not returning the cannabis. We had 30 days to respond or appeal that. And the method for which to do that under the Cannabis Control and Licensing Act is to, exhaust all of the appeals that we did, which then meant we could bring a judicial review, which is what we did, and with a petition for judicial review. And on top of that, a notice of constitutional question whereby, because the CSU can't deal with constitutional issues such as Aboriginal rights and Section 7 and other charter issues, the matter has to be brought before the Supreme Court. And that's kind of where we are at present.
And so this, everything you're talking about here, Rob, is this related? I'm assuming here, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is all related to that store that Cory was talking about that they opened in downtown Vernon. Is that correct, or is it?
Yes, because if the CSU had gone in on banned land and again had raided shops in the manner that we've seen off reserve with non-Indigenous businesses, that act would be perceived by many Indigenous as an act of war, which would completely disrupt or destabilize the fine diplomacy which the BC government has been trying to build, not just with Indigenous as a group, but you have to remember each band is like a separate entity with separate rules and separate considerations. So really the government has to address this situation with a much greater degree of deference than they ever would or could in the cases such as medicinal dispensaries. I mean, although there are constitutional rights, nothing is anywhere nearly entrenched as Indigenous and Aboriginal rights on these. So all of this is definitely related and interrelated. And, you know, just to provide a bit of context, Cory didn't just wake up one day and say, hey, he might have woken up one day and said, hey, I'm doing this, but he didn't certainly just do it and call me. It was, again, a process of, well, if we are going to sail into the storm, what's the best way to reinforce our hull and go into it? And that's for about 3 years. I said to him, well, look, you're not just going to open up. You've got to do it in a manner of which you're providing medical, compassionate access in a mode that, you know, is going to be seen and perceived as something greater than just an economic business. Hence why with the Silk Society going through the channels, the band, the leadership, the sign-off, building all of this to an apex by which, okay, now pieces are in place with the law that is yet to be given any kind of teeth, is ultimately how we got to this point where the decision was, okay, in order for the government to notice what we're doing and to be in a position to challenge them, then we're going to have to go through a process which is very much like a dance. Open the store, CSU visits, continue the sales, CSU raid, respond to the application, appeal, judicial review, and that's where we're at. But you couldn't do all of this if Cory just said, fuck it. You know, I'm going to decide and open up shops, to hell with everybody. This is what I want to do. He wouldn't have gotten this far, and we wouldn't have had, again, this perfect storm of Indigenous leadership on multiple levels in the province and in the band supporting our efforts. And just to tie this point up, we appeared before Okanagan Indian Band at the end of May to explain our case and just, you know, why we're doing what we're doing. And they knew who Cory was. None of this was a surprise. In fact, it was met with a very welcoming tone, which we were surprised. I presented the case, similar points that have been presented this morning, but the band immediately saw the fact that this is larger than just the cannabis issue and, you know, money, and this goes to the heart of a rights issue. So with that, it's one of the first times I've appeared on a band call where we drafted or helped assist the Okanagan Indian Band draft and pass a resolution that night that our case be now heard or considered by the the ONA, which is the Okanagan Nation Assembly Alliance, which is the leadership that make up and the rules, if you will, for the 5 or 6 nations that make up that, or so the bands that make up that nation. So again, we in order for us to be able to make these Aboriginal rights arguments, this is why getting band and nations on side is going to be quite key. And it's not a fast process, but the fact we've got this far and this long, and the momentum and the interest is only continued to build, is very interesting.
Cool. There's a lot of similarities between what you're describing there, Rob, and the process that you and Cory went through with the conversation we were having last time with Ted Smith. Because he was talking about how he'd deliberately do things that were not legal in the eyes of the law that he believed should have been, so that he would be shut down or arrested in different ways, so that then he could challenge that. And it sounds like you guys are doing the same thing, just in a very different kind of flavor and approach, and different set of rules and laws and different judicial process, because it touches Aboriginal rights, which is different, but it's very, very, very similar to like what he was getting into last time, which I think is super cool.
Well, there's definitely a history of which Gandhi, in many ways, brought the whole issue of what was it again? Effectively through a form of passive resistance, which again is a type of advocacy which has really been beneficial to cannabis. And so really that is a continued legacy of that style of constructive engagement, which, hey, if it led to one man planting the seeds to bring down the British Empire, and is, you know, led to folks like Dana Larson and others who have led to challenging unfair drug laws, well, utilizing that style in the context of advancing Indigenous and Aboriginal rights in cannabis, I think, you know, there's some interesting tools, because at the end of the day, government can't just pass laws. These laws have to actually mean something. And what does UNDRIP and DRIPA actually mean in practice? And the reality is the government has an idea, but nothing's implemented. And without holding government to account, you know, Cory and other members of Indigenous circles, and as well as Indigenous leadership, are not confident that the government is really going to come and turn their attention to these issues.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, I found it very odd when I was first reading about the BC DRIPA, I guess. It was really odd reading it and saying, hey, we're ratifying this thing that's all about giving Indigenous people the right to self-governance. See you in a moment, Cory. And yet at the same time, it was saying...
Sorry.
And
the word I was looking for was civil disobedience. And this type of, again, action, you could sum up as civil disobedience.
Yep, it is civil disobedience. I found it really interesting and bizarre that at the same time there is a duality happening. They're like, hey, DRIPA, we're supporting Indigenous' rights to self-governance, and simultaneously there is no framework to support it. It is illegal for people to self-govern. Was kind of this dual messaging going on. It's like, in the future we will establish a framework by which you can self-govern. We are going to tell you how you can self-govern, is kind of the messaging that was being shared there, and we're not doing it yet. It's a big job, and so even though we're saying you can self-govern, we're also saying you can't self-govern until we tell you how you can self-govern. So it's just like this like bizarre thing of like, is this lip service? Do you actually want people to self-govern? Because if you're going to let people self-govern, then you just let go and you let them self-govern. That's how self-governance works. So I always found that really fascinating in kind of a gross way, I'll call it. So let's on that note, like, Cory and Rob, you know, either you guys can answer this question. Like, it sounds to me that there's essentially two different goals for this lawsuit that's going on. The first is like the surface level. We want to be able to open up a cannabis store in our territories that's off reserve. That's like a part of it. But there's this bigger thing, right? There's this bigger thing of we want the ability to self-govern. Can you guys... I'd love to hear from you in like a few sentences, like short. Try to keep this one short, and then we'll dive into it more after. What is the goal of this lawsuit? How would you describe the goal of this lawsuit? If it were to go your way, what is the end result?
Cory, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll start, Robert. Thank you. One thing with the goal of this is to definitely assert ourselves within our territories and our jurisdictions the proper way. You know, and you kind of touched on it a bit there, like how the province or the government give us this option, but don't follow through with anything. And that's kind of where the way I see it is that we have to take these options and just run with it and go with it. We're not sitting here waiting for the province to guide us in an industry they don't know shit about, right? So it's like, we are taking this full under our control, and we will proceed forward to develop it and grow it in a way that, honestly, the federal and provincial government can't. We can take the best of both worlds and add it into a framework that makes sense for the people, by the people. You know, I think we're on the right track, and I think that us and like band members all across the board and bands need to stop asking for direction from the province or even the federal government, and just take the reins and follow through with what we're doing. And just keep it growing, because ultimately cannabis is one industry, and there's many industries that this has to take place in. So we're on the right track, and I'll let my guy Robert there take the rest of that there. Thank you.
What is the goal of this lawsuit? If you guys succeed, what happens? What's the reality?
Win, lose, or draw, we think we've won, because my experience of dealing with this kind of litigation, which, you know, the test case was 2.5 years of my life, culminating in December 2018 when we got the decision, and we kept those stores open for over 2.5 years before legalization. So really, it's like we know where to throw the tools to jam the machine, which at the moment we've succeeded in that. You know, we have the ability now to bring our case, which we're working on, which again is highlighting attention. And so, you know, making the stand that we did on May 2nd, I flew to Vancouver and met Cory. We've been working our asses off for like 2 weeks, getting, you know, to meet a 30-day limitation to get all these papers in order. And again, the good work that had been done by the BCAFN and you know, Cory came to this well-equipped and prepared. We were able to do a lot of work in a very short period of time. So I met Cory in Vancouver and we filed, and it was a big day. We took a picture of us, and you know, we went for a lunch.
You know, it's a big day if you take a picture.
To commemorate this, because at the end of the day, what it's done is, you know, we knew we would get some attention, but we've been getting, again, slowly, this has been turning into a bit of a tidal wave. And, you know, we've had Indigenous leadership and different groups reaching out because they're hearing about what we're trying to do. And they see that this isn't just Cory Brewer trying to do something for Cory Brewer. You know, in any event, you know, Cory Brewer knows how to take care of Cory Brewer, but this is Cory Brewer trying to take on a larger issue, which I couldn't be more honored to be a part of. And the notice that we're getting is interesting, because at the end of the day, this is an election year or election period coming up. In the next 2 years, we're going to have both provincial and federal elections. So at the end of the day, what is the result of our case and Cory and the sovereigntists? Well, it certainly led to Section 119 government, government licensed Indigenous stores deciding to open up sovereign shops, right? Williams Lake First Nations Chief Willie Sellers, again, great guy. He's done amazing things for furthering this agenda, but it falls short, unfortunately, of, it falls short, for example, until recently, of going against the government that was licensing them. So what that shows Cory and I, or just proves that the high road, going for the issue of governance, tying in UNDRIP along with the larger Aboriginal rights issues, and muddying the waters by not just bringing in cannabis, but looking at as well the larger issue of plant medicines, including fungi, which there's an even more convincing and compelling case for Aboriginal access and use of psilocybin, which is all up and down global. I mean, up and down the West Coast, and there's maps that I could show you of psilocybin in every continent and every country. Cannabis, there's even other evidence that's unique to this, to Silks Nation and Kamloops and other bands in various regions. Unlike the West Coast, in the interior, there are traditional plants that have been well documented, which again, Cory didn't just decide to do this. Looking at the history and the culture, that there is a plant called Indian hemp. Forgive my pronunciation, but Stetson would be, you know, what it looks like in English phonetic letters, which is hemp. There's another plant that Kamloops have called, it's YU7LI, which is their word for cannabis. So, you know, this is, again, if you're going to look at regulating a plant at the phytocannabinoid level, then, you know, to discount and exclude First Nations, who Mark Miller, the former Aboriginal minister, you know, stated that First Nations are the first agricultural innovators, and to sideline and exclude them from being able to decide rules and regulations around propagation of plants and farming and agriculture, which cannabis permeates into all of that, makes this a real hotbed issue. And I mean, it's a real situation that, you know, the government we expect will take more serious as we begin to assemble our evidence.
Cool. My final question for you before I turn to the questions from our audience, and to any audience member listening, please go ahead and like upvote the ones that you want. We'll go in order of most popular. Bless you as well.
Thank you. COVID sucks.
I totally forgot you had COVID. Even on it. Final question that I've got, and this is going to be like my only like real technical question here. Rob, technically speaking, what is the actual lawsuit? We've talked at kind of a much higher level, but I'm just curious, when we get into like the legal level, like what is the actual lawsuit itself? Can you speak to what's technical, what's the position you're taking, and how you're approaching that?
So there's, again, multiple levels, but if we look at the Section 7 issue, which under the charter is life, liberty, security of the person. Before we even look at any of the Aboriginal rights arguments, we've got, again, charter defenses. So there's Section 7. And of course, Cory, it's alleged, was selling edibles and tinctures beyond the 10 milligram cap, which part of our arguments are, again, that the 1,000, milliliter limit on topicals and tinctures and so on, and the 10 milligram cap on edibles, we've argued that that is unconstitutional. And so that's where our case and Ted Smith and the VCBC case are very complementary. We also have issues including Section 8 of the charter that deals with, you know, search and seizure. Cory's shop was searched and assets and commodities were seized, and ultimately, you know, we're asking for that back, which are valued at $64,000. Further, if it is proven that these cannabis laws affect the charter, then, you know, the knock-on effect of that will be amendments to the Cannabis Act. So those are those pieces. But again, unlike Ted Smith, who, although may look First Nations at times, is not, and the club, VCBC, is, again, nothing to do with Aboriginal rights, despite being located on Songhees territory. This is, again, why Cory's case really is like, you know, it's like having a few aces compared to Ted's case, because ultimately, Cory, by virtue of the Aboriginal piece, enables us to go for even larger charter arguments. So getting to the high ground really is the Section 2B arguments, which deal with freedom of conscience, freedom of religion, and freedom of expression. Again, Aboriginal pieces here are not really neatly compartmentalized, like recreational or medical. No, I mean, where's to say that the methods and the procedures and processes by which Cory has been promoting his business and engaging in his business are not a freedom of expression or elements of religion and so on. So there's the 2B elements. Moving even forward, so that leads up to the Aboriginal rights arguments, which would be dealt with under Section 35 of the Constitution. And ultimately, we're going to try to throw in equality rights, because if we're able to demonstrate that the charter rights offend the charter, then ultimately, should those apply to just Indigenous or to Canadians at large, which then gives us the Section 15, which are equality rights under the charter. So all of that have effectively been argued, with our evidence more or less being that Indigenous have been engaging with cannabis and other seed propagation plants and fungi for food, social, and ceremonial purposes prior to European contact, despite tremendous efforts by the federal government, including 100+ years of prohibition and tying cannabis to opium, have effectively attempted to extinguish, but they have not extinguished, as we would argue, any Aboriginal rights or title involving these plants and sacrament. Therefore, meaning that if we're successful on those arguments, it could lead to the framework of Aboriginal, Indigenous level of government having more rights of sovereignty and self-determination over not just the issues involving the licensing of this commodity, but the food, social, and ceremonial uses, which again do not fit neatly within a commercial category as applies to First Nations, while also taking on some of the medical side. So again, unlike private owners of medical, cannabis dispensaries who are non-Indigenous and non-Indigenous producers, none of them have any of these constitutionally protected and entrenched rights that they can argue. So to sum up, we have spoken with TED, and actually that reminds me, we need to get on this, because we have said to them, maybe there is some merit in our cases being heard together. TED and the club can make Section 7 and Section 15 arguments on, much stronger than I think Cory can, just on the basis that they've been doing this for over 37 years. Cory's been doing it for 3 or 4, right? Or maybe more. On that, though, TED, as indicated, are not Aboriginal. They're not Indigenous. So in many ways, I don't know, we're an ultimate wingman to them and vice versa. And that's where I think this case could be a lot larger than any of us anticipated, which at the end of the day is the government's going to have to address this either way, because we're not going away. And we're in this position that we're in.
Does any ruling that happens in relation to all the stuff you've been talking about, and this is like, I don't understand Canadian laws and how it works and how the legal system works, but does any ruling that happens around everything you just mentioned there, does it automatically apply to non-cannabis stuff too? Or is it like specifically to cannabis, and then that opens the door a little bit, somebody else can kind of like take on a different situation and be like, hey, but this thing here, and let's do a new legal battle using that case's outcome as a foundation? Like, how? Because what I'm most curious about, just on a personal level, is kind of the whole UNDRIP, DRIPA. Let's force the government to let us have self-governance. Not specific to cannabis, just generally speaking, like Indigenous people should be able to fully self-govern. How does, on a technical level, this case tie into that?
I'm trying to understand your question.
Okay, let me rephrase. Everything you just talked about kind of tied specifically into cannabis in some kind of way in terms of what you expressed.
Okay.
Earlier, we were talking about the broader implications of
I, I, I really
self-governance.
do. I really think it does open the doors for the other options that you're talking about. This is just the start. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, the way to answer your question, I just want to be sure I understood it, but ultimately, we're throwing everything in the kitchen sink. Because at the end of the day, we have an opportunity for the matter to go before a judge in Supreme Court. Now, we are hoping to bring another matter involving federal court, because not to confuse things, you've got the federal court, which involves federal government, and then each province has their supreme or superior court. Because this involves the CSU, our case is in Supreme Court, which means there could be some limitations. But ultimately, we're hoping that if this does establish a Aboriginal right, for example, oh my God, that would open this up into so many potential directions that the future is unwritten there, right? Very much like how Smith and Allard weren't really going after like, oh, we want to see this in the law. It was more of the medical marijuana purpose regs, or the good old MMPRs, which sought to exclude medical production and home cultivation altogether, was found to be constitutionally incompatible with the charter. Therefore, it was declared incompatible with the charter, and the government had 6 months to remedy that defect, which they did by bringing in the ACMPR as effectively the Band-Aid to deal with the medical issue, which literally was then just cut and pasted into the back of the Cannabis Act for where we find ourselves today. But no one could have envisaged in those cases exactly how the Cannabis Act would have taken shape, because of course Trudeau hadn't been elected yet. So again, this could very well be a platform on which a government lobbies or campaigns on, or that, again, Indigenous groups as a lobby and a coordinated effort, again, have the ability to point to what we're doing and point to the fact that the 119 route isn't working. But by the same token, there has to be some degree of harmonization between what everybody's doing if the cannabis industry is to go anywhere meaningful. Because at the end of the day, Aboriginal groups are engaging in an activity which is, again, another form of competition to the legal market. And we all know that the cannabis industry as a whole is on a downward trajectory. But for my money, if I have to bet, my money's on Indigenous, because they do have the powers to enter into long-term agreements with government and hydro and utility authorities, which, if we look at what are the most labor-intensive commodities in the production of cannabis, it's water and hydroelectricity. Well, Indigenous groups could grow and shut the lights out on the cannabis industry as a whole. So to say, what are the knock-on effects of our case, it could lead to something completely different, which might be a good thing for the cannabis industry at large, but at the end of the day, it'll be a good thing for Indigenous, who certainly have a right to be in this industry and to some extent have been relegated to a secondary position in this industry.
So let me kind of paraphrase what I'm understanding as it relates specifically to the Indigenous rights side of things, and correct me if I'm wrong with my interpretation here. This case, if you guys are successful with the legal side and the litigation and the judicial system that you're going through right now, let's say like over here at the edge of my screen, we have this goal of full Indigenous right to self-governance and the ability to just do whatever the heck each band wants, because that's the whole point of UNDRIP and DRIPA. And this case will take you somewhere towards that, and it's just unclear how close towards that you will get based off this case alone. It could be like right here, it could be right there, it could open the door a bit towards that, it could like massively open the door and just enable anybody to kind of do what they want, and it's unclear where it'll end up, but it's gonna move the needle forward in some kind of significant, measurable way. Is that interpretation correct?
You're totally correct. I mean, you could go to 10 lawyers or 10 lay folk, and everyone has their own interpretation. And that's the beauty of this type of litigation. I mean, I went to Oxford law school.
Oh, can you hear him, Cory? Is he cutting off for you
He's
too?
cutting out there, Robert.
Can you say something now, Robert? Can you say something?
Something to do with my phone. It should be off now.
Okay, you're back. We're back to hearing you. Oh, but it looks like you froze. Okay, well, while Rob kind of figures that out, Cory, I think.
Here we go.
Oh, there he is.
Here we go. No, there's something to do with my phone and earbuds, and we're back. But look, at the end of the day, Cory had to make a decision. Am I going to plead guilty, pay a fine, and go quietly into that good night with respect to Aboriginal rights and so on? And ultimately, we don't know where this is going to end up. We just know that we have to continue with the process. We have to keep moving forward. And the nice thing is that we do have arguments. We do have sympathetic courts, and we do have groups that have been reaching out with evidence. And we haven't really spoken about how do you prove or show a Aboriginal right, and there is no neat and compartmentalized answer. So again, that's why it was interesting for me to study at Oxford, at a university where there's Socratic method, because ultimately that's what we did every week, was take irreconcilable arguments here with irreconcilable arguments here and try to reconcile them. Well, here we have so many conflict of laws, which again allow us to make arguments. Now, whether the courts agree with our interpretation, we're going to take them on a journey. And ultimately, we have to throw everything in the kitchen sink at them, leave it all in the ring, which if we don't do that, we might not go the distance, because at each stage of these proceedings, the federal government, the provincial government, just like in the test case, are going to argue and say, well, you have no right to bring these arguments. Then we have to argue standing. And then we have to if we get through standing, be able to argue that these are constitutional issues. And then on top of it, that they're not just constitutional, these are Aboriginal issues. So to be able to prove that is no small feat. But this is where it gets unique, because music, song, oral tradition, stories, art, cave painting, artwork, symbols, stories, all of these things have been recognized by the courts as demonstrating a history or a tradition. And ultimately, this isn't where you've got bands just waking up one day going, we never had anything to do with cannabis and plant medicines. If anything, they're saying, well, this has been our tradition. Our traditions have been denied. Let's use UNDRIP as a vehicle by which to test these boundaries. And if we win, great. Those boundaries and demarcations will shift. If we lose, well, nothing ventured, nothing gained. Worst case scenario, Cory's looking at a fine and some legal costs. But if we don't challenge, if we don't take, to engage and challenge this process, the laws will never move.
Yeah. Cool, guys. Appreciate all that. I'm going to go through the questions, and then after that, we'll give you guys an opportunity to wrap things up and share anything you want to share around that. First question from Ryan99. Don't know how to pronounce your last name. Apologies if I butchered that completely. Why is the agreement made with the province of BC? If it's First Nations lands with its own sovereignty, it is its own nation. Doesn't that mean an agreement can only be made with the federal government, as agreements can only be made nation to nation, and the province of BC isn't a nation? Not sure what the context of that was. I remember that question coming up in the earlier part of the conversation.
I can answer that quickly.
Yeah, go for it.
Basically, hang on. Yeah, so BC government has jurisdiction over distribution of cannabis. That's why the federal. Am I muted?
No, I can hear you.
Oh, it's because I'm muted. Anyway, but no, the BC government deals with distribution, which again presents a problem because Indigenous traditionally are stewards of the federal government. However, when it comes to the sales and distribution of cannabis, that is a provincial or provincial heading. So under our Constitution, Section 91 deals with the federal heads of power. Section 92 deals with provincial heads of power, and Section 213 specifically deals with provincial trade and industry, which again, just cannabis being regulated at the federal level for licensing, sales and distribution are a provincial issue. So that provides, I think, the context for my question, but why Cory didn't go that way is because the band has essentially no jurisdiction to license an entity off of banned land. That technically would be a decision that the municipality of Vernon could license. However, given that Vernon has no authority to deal with or address UNDRIP, again, it was really done to test the jurisdiction as to where does UNDRIP start and stop. Because you have to remember the definition of UNDRIP deals with traditional land. So for Cory, that's downtown Vernon, the airport, so many 100 miles in either direction, technically. What has the band been relegated to under the Indian Act is very much demarcated as reserve land. And so what is reserve land is different than what could be usually considered as traditional land. Hence why Cory did what he did by opening off reserve, literally like lobbing a grenade into a building and seeing how people react. And well, reaction has been, we don't know what the fuck to do, right? Like the police, the art rating, the city of Vernon isn't up everyone's ass with bylaw. Because ultimately, I think government, like federal, provincial, and municipal, don't know what to do here. But they do know that if push comes to shove, Cory and Indigenous groups will do, which is what we're doing, which is bringing a challenge and settling this dispute before the courts, which, again, are the third branch of government.
Cool. Next question from Celeste Rain. Hi, Celeste. It's been many years since I've last seen you. Celeste asks, my husband is Sioux and Okanagan band member. We are master grower wanting to grow and sell independently on our property. Our land is located on the border of Sioux and Tanaha traditional lands. Is this possible? How do we achieve this? And they have, it's their own private property on the territory boundary of Sioux and Tanaha. And she also asks, could he get a license from the band to work off reserve? Which, based off of what you're saying, Cory, because this question came before we got into like kind of the issues with the store, sounds like this is what this whole lawsuit is about. So so you'll want to watch this lawsuit very closely and maybe get involved in it too to help kind of create a reality where you can do that. I'll turn it over to you guys though to see if there's anything else you want to add to that.
I think that any kind of interveners would be great to help out through the process. And yes, there's always room for more.
And I think it's important to do. There was the recent Green Mile case where a number of BC retailers sued the BC government over the plethora of unlicensed stores or BC government licensed stores that are operating in a particular corridor of Vernon. And actually, I remember Cory about 2 years ago, he took me for a drive and we looked at the Green Mile. And so ultimately, this group of business owners sued the BC government saying, you owe us duty of care to enforce against these illegal stores who are unlicensed because that's cutting your bottom line. And I think Cory he'll attest to the fact that I told him when that day after or shortly after that case was filed, I was like, they're not going to win. The government does not owe a duty of care to other BC retailers. It's called select enforcement, which government is not bound by the common law doctrines of estoppel actions, meaning they can be held to their word if it would be inequitable not to do so. So in that instance, I said to Cory, like, the government won't, the courts will not establish that because it will open a floodgates argument. Anyone that has a failing cannabis business can sue the government. So what it has done is, it rightly or wrongly, is it has led to Indigenous groups looking at that saying, well, unlike non-Indigenous groups, at least us Indigenous groups with UNDRIP Aboriginal rights arguments plus band and council passing laws and regulations allowing these activities, it really creates a complicated, multi-headed hydra at both levels of government. I don't think know how to deal with, other than they hope it will go, which we know it won't, and it hasn't.
Final question here we got from Sammy. I don't know how to pronounce your last name, Sammy. Michelli. I'll have to ask you next time we hang out how to pronounce your name. But she's got a really cool name, and is definitely not a bias here with the same spelling as her. Shout out, Sammy. She's got a question.
I think it's Maselli.
Maselli?
Yeah.
Michele.
I know the Sammy.
Italian, even though I believe it's an Argentinian last name, if I remember correctly. Like mycelium in Italian. Myceli. I don't know how to say mycelium in Italian. Well, I'm gonna go with my original Micelli that I did there. I hadn't seen your response about it being like, I got it right. I didn't even see your messages there first. Anyway,
there we go. I have that corrected.
Curious, how did Ted fund the lawyer fees when HSE? I don't know. When he was getting booked, I bet you that's what she's trying to say. I mean, yes, we need a touch of civil disobedience to make strong, effective change. At the same time, how can we have our communities' backs to ensure no one gets left behind in the fight and the cause? I don't know if you can speak to that, Laurie, because I don't think you were involved in that process. Maybe you know the answer, though?
Well, I know Ted fairly well, and I have a pretty good idea of what's going on. Having worked closely with Ted's lawyers. No, I think this is definitely an opportunity for some collaboration and unity, which prior to legalization, you had a much more unified and cohesive cannabis community that was pulling together in single directions to move some pretty big mountains. And it seems since legalization, everyone's scurried off into their corners of the industry and faded off in obscurity. However, I think, now is definitely a time to get behind our case and to get behind Ted's situation, because ultimately these are the little battles that end up, moving. Now, win, lose, or draw, what these cases do is they do bring some clarity and make opportunity for the courts to weigh in and clarify where these boundaries are is very important. And at the end of the day, why Kirk's lawyers do what they do and why I do what I do. And I mean, these are big cases. These are expensive cases. There's a passion to take on and see something through that hasn't done before, that is difficult, but we all have our respective experience in handling these cases. But again, as mentioned, this scenario involving the Indigenous piece, because of the constitutionally entrenched issues, does tremendous potential to impact in a positive way the same issues that are plaguing the non-Indigenous legal cannabis industry as a whole. So again, this is why it would be wonderful to work with more groups, establish some more interveners in our case, as well as working with Indigenous groups and bands and leadership across Canada. This is larger than just a BC issue. And we want it to be something that we can replicate in federal court, which again, the use of cannabis across Canada, the Mi'kmaq in the East have a unique history. The Mohawk in Central Canada have a very unique history. Prairie nations, again, think about it. The prairies from Honduras to northern Saskatchewan, the trade route. And then, of course, you have the unique histories of the interior plateau First Nations like Cory in BC. But all of those elements, line them together, that's a significant case with significant evidence with the potential for significant change. So we hope the non-Indigenous industry is listening and watching, and please reach out and come forward. We can do more together. Cory, what are your thoughts?
100%. Yes. The more we have, the stronger we are, whether it's Indigenous or not. Every band that I see that is partaking in the industry is really strengthening that part of the industry. So I don't think any of us are doing anything wrong in any way. I think the way that and the only way forward is to bring people together in that light. So yes, 100%.
And there's a question about fundraising. I mean, Ted's been doing fundraising. He's been working with lawyers that, again, they have experience. And like Cory, it really comes down to client lawyer believing in the case. And, that's basically how Ted is funding his case. He's got lawyers. They know what they're doing. Public believes in what they're doing, and they're supported that way.
Final question from me. We got through all our audience questions there. What do you guys need help with your case? Like, I imagine there's like a lot on your plate and that you guys could use support in different kind of ways. Like, first off, is that assumption correct? Could you use support? And if so, what are you looking for in terms of support?
Cory, would you like to take that one?
In terms of support is just the collective coming together in the right way. I think that more people that reach out, the better. That way we can direct them to either Rob or myself, or help out with any other options that might be out there. Because again, we're still learning. This is there's a lot going on, and yeah, just the collective picture needs to get bigger.
Rob, anything to add?
To extend on Cory's answer, resources, right? Evidence, support, and a way that groups can assist. Again, it would be good to hear different trade associations and groups, because the successful cases in the past that have challenged drug laws and rights and constitutional questions have also heavily relied upon the input of interveners. Interveners are effectively interested parties. So let's take, Canadian Cannabis Council of Canada, right? C3. It would be great to have C3 participate or intervening in our case. Why? Because they, as experts, would be able to clarify the same deficiencies that we're arguing about, which affect the cannabis industry at large. Having assistance from, say, the BC and Canadian retail associations would be amazing. Why? Because those do not have the constitutionally protected rights or the ability to make arguments as we do. However, the expertise and education that these groups have, as well as a collective lobby, certainly enable us to be able to engage constructively with government. And on top of it, Indigenous groups. I mean, this is, again, a very large topic. I'm not Indigenous, but I have been working for over 10 years to earn a seat at a table to be trusted with knowledge and sacred information, which, again, having folks come out who feel comfortable having, again, a confidential discussion on information and sources of information is really helpful, because at the end of the day, this case could come down to an obscure bit of evidence, which may seem obscure on one hand, but by definition will be at the heart of these arguments. So in the past, there's been beaded wampum blankets and hemp, which have, again, demonstrated treaties between governments and bands and nations, which are traditions which, again, pre-exist before the federal system. So ultimately, connecting with groups and collaborating is just going to be necessary. So yeah, reach out.
Cool. How can people reach you if they want to reach out? How can they connect with you guys over this court case?
Well, I'm happy to give out my information, and I mean, Cory can certainly give out his, and I think just reach out.
Just your website, would they find your contact info there? Adlusum Law?
So Adlusum Law, but yeah, 604-218-1084. That's a number you can reach me, and then rob@adlusumlaw.com. All the info's on the webpage. I'm sure Sammy can post some follow-up details. Reach out to me, and then Cory, provide your info. And
so my number is 250-306-9273. I can be reached through my cell phone or my TIMIXw Holdings email address, cory.brewer@timiqholdings.ca.
And TIMIXw,
TIMIXw Holdings. Not wellness, it's Holdings. It's our holdings company, yeah.
Cool, guys. Well, thank you so much for your time. Before we wrap up, this is the last thing I will say here is what the next episode is going to be about. It's going to go in a very different direction from today's conversation. The guest that we have is the president of OKIB, which is l'Association Québécoise de l'Industrie du Cannabis. It's the Québécois Cannabis Industry Association, where Quebec is pretty unique. We were on a trip to Montreal a couple months ago at this point, and kind of learned that there's a lot more bullshit happening there as far as the provincial government goes related to cannabis compared to most provinces. The CEO of that organization, Pierre, I forget his last name, he's going to be coming on to talk about kind of what are the unique challenges of Quebec. So quite a different conversation from today, but an interesting one nonetheless. Cory, Rob, thank you guys so much for being here today. Any final word or two you want to share?
I just just give a good shout out to our team, the TIMIXw team. It's been working hard and doing very good in the industry, and also to everybody else that's involved in the industry. No matter what, we're all doing great work, pushing forward, and we'll just keep it up. Keep up the good work, everybody.
Cool, and I see people asking in the comments about contact info. If you weren't able to grab it, the video will replay automatically. You can just jump to the end and get that information again. And I think there's people who've shared stuff here. But yeah, Celeste, if you missed it, the replay, you can go find it there. All right, guys. I
Thanks for
will
having us.
see y'all later. Thank you guys again for being here today. And to everybody, I hope you have a fantastic, wonderful rest of your day, your week, your month, and your year. Ta-ta.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Have a great one.
Cheers.